Okay, so I hadn't prepared a Divrei Torah, but I will tell you that in that we have included Avinu Malkeinu in our Shachrit Mincha prayers. I've returned to a liturgy with which I'm very much familiar, but that I do see it in a different way. When in the past we would invoke Dever or Magefa, to me this is something that belonged to the Middle Ages and ancient times. It wouldn't affect us, not locally, not globally. I've taken a new look at that. When we consider Makot, plagues, with which Pharaoh struggled, I always found it a function of his unique and a stubborn personality, that he didn't get it, that he needed 10 plagues until he finally relented, having now experienced what a plague is and understanding the calculations, not only of the federal government, but the way the medical community will look at this, the economists, and even the journalists who were a little bit late life as they've always lived it, and they're very reluctant to make any changes. Quite frankly, one question I was asked by that interviewer from Newsday yesterday is, would we as a congregation have done anything differently regarding when we decided to suspend our daily services and Shabbat services and so forth and so on? And I told him to tell him the truth, that no, I don't think that I would have made any change given the information we had at the time, and that we wanted to keep things up and running. I think when the decisions, at least in this community, were made, they were made quickly and decisively. Maybe the last thought I would share has to do with this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav. There is the notion toward the beginning of the Torah portion that Aharon is commanded to bring out the ashes of the sacrifice from the previous day. We know that Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch indicates that teaches us that we shouldn't rest on our laurels. Rather, we should take a look at this day's work. And we shouldn't constantly be looking in our rear view mirror. We've got to look forward. We've got to have a vision for the future. I think it's very much the same in this case. There can be all sorts of second thoughts, what could have been, what should have been, what we should have known, what we did know, did we make the right decision or not? But I do think that we've got to look forward, make the most of this time. For those in the pulpit rabbinate to connect with congregants. There are all sorts of different ways of doing it. I'm sure you're doing in your community what we're doing in ours. Actually, under the sad circumstances, it's been a good experience for us. I've been teaching every day of the week except for Shabbos. We have a Miluch Hasadim committee that's been reaching out to the scores of people who we would put in the category of being the most vulnerable, getting groceries and medications for them. We've kept our Hebrew school up and running through personal contact over the phone, through giving the kids homework. I think we have to look toward the future rather than regret our past. And I think we can emerge stronger than ever before if we take that point of view. Thank you for the opportunity, Noah. And thank you, Noah, for putting together this meeting. Very much appreciated.
Absolutely happy to do so.
Something I've been thinking about for maybe a Shabbat Hagadol talk to be posted online and Zoom to my congregants, whatever, is when Lot is choosing to separate from Avraham, he decides to go to Sodom, and he looks and he says it's like Gan Eden, like Mitzrayim. And that always, I mean, the connection to me is both of them have great river systems and they inundate regularly. So their life is should be in theory at least relatively easy because it's good for agriculture there. So I was thinking about that, and then Rashi's comment about when the two Malachim come and he gives them matzah. They say it's like Pesach. It's like his personal Pesach, his salvation, even though Pesach hasn't happened yet. So I'm working on this concept of somehow that Egypt, in a certain sense, is like Gan Eden. In other ways, clearly not for Bnei Yisrael as a place of Avdut, and tying together that how people can see themselves or praying for a personal redemption, making really this feel really like a real Pesach, as opposed to just saying, feel like you're redeemed. Maybe people feel really more like they're redeemed. It's like Lot had his own personal Pesach. We have to look for our own. So I haven't put it together yet, but that's just a thought that was in my head.
Very nice. Appreciate those thoughts. I see Rabbi Bacon waving his hand. We'll find him on the participant list. And you are unmuted.
Thank you very much. It's very good to see everyone. Thank you, Noah, for initiating this meeting. I find myself thinking about Pesach, and Pesach is the ultimate family holiday, and here we find ourselves by ourselves in isolation, just with our wives, spouses, but away from the family, whether it's across Jerusalem on the other side of the city where I can see my children and grandchildren only by Skype or Zoom, or across the world. And, you know, we think about basic part of the Seder is the asking and answering. But we know that even if you're by yourself, you're supposed to ask and answer, but it makes it a lot harder to think for yourself, ask, answer, wonder about what is going on here in the world. I find myself in the strange position of being what they call in Israel in the Kvutzat Sikun, just by chronological age. But to go back to the issue of Pesach as a family holiday, I have to say a great thank you to our dear colleague David Novak for publishing his tshuva about the use of Zoom. I don't plan to use it personally. Thankfully, my kids can run a Seder by themselves, but my son-in-law's parents are ill, can't really do much, and they plan to adopt that tshuva. And I thank David again for his courageous words in the context that the chief rabbinate here has denounced the psak that was given by rabbis here. Most particularly disturbing about their statement, you can probably find it online, their guidelines for Pesach, and this is the very last paragraph. They say that the rabbis who issued the heter, the Sephardi rabbis, einam musmachim lomar et zeh. They didn't say what they said that was wrong, but they said einam musmachim. And that was somewhat disturbing. I also thank David for the additional letter he wrote, inspired by my nephew, Rabbi Moshe Gruskat, which clarified things even further. So I thank him very much for that. Besides that, I hope that all of you are well. You know, we all have a story like we heard from before about your mother. Unfortunately, Jeff is not doing well, and a close friend of ours is hospitalized. Times like this bring out the best and the worst in people, and also the best and the worst in rabbis, unfortunately. Some rabbis who have been irresponsible in not telling people not to gather, and the results we see in Bnei Brak in particular, but also here in Yerushalayim. I hope that this will be a time for rethinking. As I forget, Bruce said, I think that thinking forward and not just back. Although I'm a historian, I always think a little bit back. And people have recalled the great influenza epidemic after World War I. And I've seen things that I never thought I would see in my life again, that I've only read about in books. Believe it or not, in Jerusalem, just a week or so ago, and this was, of course, recorded on YouTube, there was what's called a Schwarze Chasana. And if you don't know what that is, that means that there was this idea that a plague could be stopped by marrying in the cemetery 2 orphans. And this actually happened in Yerushalayim about a week or 10 days ago. I never thought I would see that. I only read about it in folklore descriptions, but it actually took place. People are going back to past methods of dealing with plague, but I think the best way is what Bruce said about Avinu Malkeinu and prayers. The rabbis here in the neighborhood in Ramot, where I live, have been creative in having groups saying Tehillim, davening, shiurim galore on Zoom, and all kinds of things. I have my own shiur, which I teach for many, many years here in Ramot. So I've been giving people materials to study rather than doing it. I think I'm going to take the plunge, Noah, inspired by you, and do something on Zoom next week, right before Pesach. But I'll give it a try. If I have some problems, I'll connect with you. But in the meantime, I wish the best to everyone for Chag Kasher v'Sameach, and Bezrat Hashem na'avor et zeh b'shalom. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have our next volunteer? Rabbi Novak is raising his hand, so I am going to mute Rabbi Bacon and unmute Rabbi Novak, and you're on the air.
Okay. It's good to see y'all, at least in cyberspace, Chaverim, whom and I'm glad. I'm unhappy about the circumstances, but I'm glad that I was able to be of some help in terms of two correspondences with Rabbi Moshe Gruskat. 2 points that I alluded to in the comments that I made to Rabbi Gruskat, which I just gave sources for, but these are two related points. And of course, our overall motivation. I mean, halakha doesn't poskin itself. Poskim come with a point of view. Now they can't just say anything they want. They've got to have some sources that at least don't contradict their point of view. But nonetheless, when people talk about a philosophy of halakha, frequently the Agadah is the philosophy of halakha. I mean, even in mitzvot, virtually all of them are supplied by Agadah, not by halachic deduction. But of course, our goal here is basically inclusiveness. Now, if we think of inclusiveness, then the mitzvah of inclusiveness is the mitzvah of hachnasat orchim. And if you look at the Gemara in Shabbat Kuf Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph, where the famous statement Gedola hachnasat orchim mikablat hashchina shenemar Adonai in al tabor al me'al avdecha. So when Avram Avinu greets the Malachim, who are in human guise, and therefore is treating them like human beings, and we know that, the Midrash says his tent was open on all four sides. This is the basis of Hasanat Orachim. And I was thinking of that, and then it dawned upon me that when Avram says to Sarah, or Sarai, she was still at that time, Lushi v'asei ugot, the several midrashim, including the midrash in Breshit Rabbah, says that this was Pros HaPesach, this was Erev Pesach, and therefore the ugot, Lushi v'asei ugot, they compare that to the pasuk in Parshat Bo, Parshat Chodesh, where it says "Yatziu et avatzek miMitzrayim ugot matzot v'lo chametz." So the ugot, they would gezer shava ugot. So that therefore the hachnasat orchim, which is a general mitzvah to at any time, but the source of it begins with Erev Pesach, and of course, obviously the midrash holds there that the famous the mission at the end of Kedushin, Kim Avram Avinu Kol Torah Shalom Nitna, that Avram Avinu kept the entire Torah before. So that Pesach is the paradigm case of hachnasat orchim, and that's what we're trying to do in terms of enabling people to at least participate over the internet. And related to that is also a source that of the question of the where the Gemara says in Psachim Kuf Zayin Amud Aleph Ton Rabbanan Im Beno Chacham Shoelo, in other words, if your son's Chacham, that he should ask the four questions. Im Lav Ishto Shoelo, if not as one's wife. Im Lav Hu Shoel Atzmo. And the notion there that a person could actually be required to have a Seder all by oneself, which is a horrible thought. I mean, clearly it's not something that somebody would do like Achilla, but this is certainly a thought there. And it dawned upon me that there are really three kinds of people that are involved in anything like the Seder or anything else. There are those people who are Polish men who are separated from the community. So therefore, their separation from the community is that they're, like, they're going to be like the Russia. They're not going to want to participate in the Seder. There are other people whom I would consider themselves parts of. In other words, if they're with a group, they keep the mitzvah. If they're not with a group, they don't keep the mitzvah. But I think that what they're saying there is that we are participants in. In other words, optimally and under all circumstances, we should be with others. If for some reason we can't be with others, we are still part of the tzibur, even though they're not physically present. The example of that is when you daven by yourself. Virtually all the prayers, certainly the prayer of Matei Shel Tefillah, are we, anu or anachnu. Elokai Mitzor is an exception, but that was a private prayer initially in the Gemara. So therefore, that our instincts are for inclusion, Achnasat Orchim, and whatever. And it's not like my friend Blue Greenberg says, where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. And there's some things that we cannot do. But if we can possibly do this, and our motives are l'shem shamayim, then as the Gemara says in Menachot Kofdet, that if we come to do what's pure and what's right, God helps us to find the sources so that we're consistent with the halacha. So I wish everybody a Chag Kosher V'Sameach and a Chag Shel Briut, and b'mheira b'yameinu we should be able to be all together with those we know and love in person and not just via cyberspace, but cyberspace is better than nothing.
Amen. Thank you for your thoughts, Rabbi Novak. I think I saw Rabbi Gruscott volunteering, so hold on, let me find him in this list. Rabbi Gruscott, you are...
Thank you, Rabbi Novak, for pointing out our inclination, which has nothing to do with chumrah or kula. It's what we want optimally, what we understand initially as optimal, that it is a tzibur or collective or mishpacha. One should never be alone for Pesach. But b'diavad, if we are forced to be alone, and not because we're porish min tzibur, because the tzibur is not available to us, my strategy, and I hope I'm not being accused of being selfish, is to take the advantage that I think many of us who are oskim b'tzarchei tzibur never do enough. Taking time for yourself, me, myself, and I, and of course, I'm assuming I get a little credit for not being choshev b'ksherim. I don't really mean selfish, of course. B'diavad, it's been a long, long time since I've been forced to connect when I daven with Hashem purely on a one-to-one basis. And that will extend, thank God, I'm here with my wife, etc. alone. But in terms of even limud, in terms of certainly in davening, or even if I take the time out, as I have not done, because I'm not in a rush. I'm actually washing my hands, and taking the time to make the motzi. I'm doing things with kavanah that I don't know if I represent anyone or anyone average, but I see it's the silver lining in this cloud of isolation. I take advantage of the solitude that I can see in relating to Torah and mitzvot. So for what that's worth.
Thank you, Rabbi Gruskade. I wanted to recognize myself before I run out of other people to recognize, because I wouldn't want people to think that in the spirit of Acharon Chaviv, I left myself to last. So let me give a couple of thoughts. One is, I think, thoroughly unrelated to coronavirus, because I think we need to remind ourselves to every once in a while think of things that are purely Torah and purely mundane and things that are just not directly related. So something that I'd never really thought about before so much, the perhaps most important and most halachically required part of the Seder is the mention of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. We're told by Rabban Gamliel that anyone who doesn't say those three things has not fulfilled the obligation. And I never really given much thought to the source of Rabban Gamliel's comment. And in reading through a bit in the Torah Chaim Haggadah, I saw a Perush from Perush Kadmon, which talks about, in explaining Pesach, the first of the three, we're told that you have to mention the Pesach. And why Pesach? Because the God Pasach al Batei Avotenu, will take the translation of passed over the homes of our ancestors. And we have a proof text, Shene'emar, as it said, Ve'amarta zevach Pesachu ladonai, asher pasach al batei v'nei Yisrael b'Mitzrayim, v'nagfo et Mitzrayim, v'batenu hitzil, v'yikod ha'am v'yishtahavu. And what I just never, taken a moment to think about, that this first proof text that's given as we discuss the three things that we must mention starts with the word ve'amartem, and you shall say, which the Perush Kadmon takes as an indication that this, in fact, is the source text for the requirement of mentioning Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. And the footnote in the Torah Chaim Haggadah mentions that Tosafot indicates on page 116a of Psachim, Dibur Hamachil ve'amartem, but that a number of people disagree and point out that verse is stated in response to a child's ki yishalcha, when a child asks, and so it's hard to necessarily say that's the source for having to mention these three things, and that other people suggest that the source text is from the verse that says, let me see if I can find this mention. And I think they cite Exodus 13, 8 as the source for having to recite these three things in the Haggadah, which is when it's ve'amarta, it says, and you should tell your child. And that's, I think, the verse often used for the Eno Yadei Lishol, which doesn't have a question prompt and just says, here's something you should say. So I just thought it was interesting to think about the source for the requirement to mention Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, and different opinions on that. And that's one thought. And the other thought I wanted to offer, more directly related to our situation, is that I think for me, and for many of us, having special, new, and personal meaning at our Seders this year will be the phrase halach ma'anya, that this is, I'll translate for this moment, the bread of affliction, and that there'll be a sense for all of us that we are in a period of affliction, and our raising the matzah with our very close relatives who we're with, if any, or our spouses or family who's still living with us, to raise that matzah with fewer people and not in the company of our usual family and friends will give us a palpable sense of the words halach ma'anya. Should of course inspire us with an understanding and compassion for those who are in even more dire straits at the moment, or who live in a world where they are often repasting on forms of lachma anya. And I suppose some of the antidote to that is suggested in the next words, and I think in the themes that Rabbi Novak touched upon. Kol dichvin yateh v'yechol, kol ditzrich yateh v'yefsach, that part of our path out of affliction is through inclusiveness, is through caring for each other and caring for people in need, and recognizing people's needs and figuring out how best, even in situationally appropriate manners, we can provide that caring, and hopefully doing all that will bring us closer to a realization of a modern day hashata hacha. This is our situation at the moment, but l'shana haba'a b'nei chorin, in future times we should be free of this affliction and free of other afflictions that we or others suffer from. So those are my thoughts. Anyone else want to share some thoughts? Okay, Rabbi Levy is now actually raising his hand, and he is unmuted.
Okay. My thought was regarding Rambam. Hilchot Chametz U'Matzah. In Rambam's Mishnah Torah, he says that the three words, Otanu Hotzi Misham, God took us out from there, fulfill the obligation to show oneself as if he personally left Egypt. Those words appear in the telling of the story of the Exodus given in Sefer Dvarim, Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verses 21 through 23, which begins with the words, Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. What this implies is that we could have fulfilled the mitzvah of Haggadah, which is to tell the story of the Exodus starting with Gnut, with the lowly station of our people at the time, and ending Bishvach with the praise of Hashem for taking us out from Egypt, by simply reciting those three verses from Deuteronomy right after the four questions, continuing straight through. And in doing so, we would have also fulfilled our obligation to show ourselves as if we personally had come out of Egypt. The Chachamim, in stressing at that point, after saying Avadim hayinu lefaro b'Mitzrayim, that Kol hamarbeh l'saper b'yetziat Mitzrayim harei ze mishubach, that everyone who increases the amount, the more one tells, the merrier, basically. The more one tells, the more praiseworthy it is. And then filling in all of the stories that they do in between there and getting around to Otanu Hotzi Misham, after we do Rabban Gamliel, we're simply adding layers upon layers to a most succinct version of the story, which came from those three verses in Deuteronomy, and would have sufficed to minimally fulfill both obligations. That's the insight I wanted to share. I have a halakhic question to ask since we've got some of our post-game on board. In previous years, I've done a Seder at a nursing home in the area. This year, of course, that's not going to happen, but the person who runs these things called me the other day and asked if there was some way to do it remotely. We came up with the idea that if I were to get him a video that he could then put on a DVD disc, he can run it through a system that will be available on a channel on the TV sets of patients who want to tune in. So the Jewish patients who want a Seder would be able to tune into my Seder at whatever time they pick. The question that I have is, what should I do about brachot, particularly brachot HaMitzvah that aren't appropriate when I tape this thing later this evening, because it's got to get done today at some point, to send in to him. What should I do about the brachot?
Hold on, Rabbi Novak, I think it started.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the brachot, I mean, as long as you're making it for yourself, that's okay. If you're not, we have the notion of l'hitla made. That if I am teaching a child, how to blow the shofar or whatever, that I actually can make the bracha, and I can make the bracha v'shem b'malchut, and it's not considered to be bracha l'vatolam because it's
Okay.
made.
So can I say al achilat matzah and al achilat maror in that sense?
Yeah, and I think that you would preface it by just indicating that you're doing this as an example of how it's to be done.
Right. I mean, since my bracha isn't going to be most of them anyway, I have to tell them to repeat word after word with me anyway. So I'll make it that way.
Right. You're basically showing them how to do it.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you. Would someone else like to share some words of Torah, chizuk, Haggadah thoughts, anything else? Most people have offered thoughts. Any other volunteers? I think Rabbi Berman is raising his hand, and
all right, I'm on now, I think. I'm sorry. It's just I was thinking when Noah was giving his drasha on halach ma'anya, one of the things, I often have a fight with my oldest son over this because I look at the Haggadah very historically, and I'm always interested in how it develops one way or the other. But there's two girsa'ot. Is it halach ma'anya or is it kehalach ma'anya? And so one attempt to explain the claim was that kehalach ma'anya was during the time of the Beit HaMikdash because there was no reason for it to say it's a bed of affliction. Today, without the Beit HaMikdash, we say halach. Now, once again, it is the bread of affliction. Whether or not that's historically accurate, I think playing on what Noah was saying, this year really is halach ma'anya, just like you said. Maybe we should think about in future years turning it back to halach ma'anya when we don't have such a situation. So the first thing that came to my mind was that, and the secondly is that we know that at the beginning of the Seder, it's lach ma'anya, but then later on, all of a sudden, it becomes the bread that our ancestors ate when they left Egypt. So the Seder, of course, goes from bondage to freedom. And just, we can think when we're sharing around our table tonight, to Pesach, with those who may be there, that, we can hope that this is the beginning of the end, that we're eating it alone, small groups, maybe it will soon be able to be the bread that's going out with us on our way out of Egypt. I'm just thinking along those lines. I don't have a shul to deal with. You guys can come up with your drushes from that, but I think it's important to remember that it's a process that we're going from one state to another. So too, what we're going through right now, God willing, is from one state to another. What will be like after the end of it, I don't know, but with this hope, it's more of chayrut than it is avdut. That's it.
amen, and thank you. I'm going to unmute Rabbi Weisblum if you have something to share with us?
Okay, hello everybody. First, I would like to start with big yashar koach to Noah and all the wonderful colleagues that share the Divrei Torah. It's really amazing and beautiful. I think first point is that when we are leaning during the Seder, this year, unlike a regular year when we are physically instruct other people to lean, this year we are just leaning on each other. And obviously it's not just in a sense of metaphor or figurative idea, but you see people out of blue coming out and helping other people. And that's part of what's transpired this year. So this is something we can elaborate and expand at length. The whole idea of Zoom that now so many colleagues are using, including myself, for Shacharit and Arvit on a daily basis. It's beyond beautiful. I remember when YouTube started many years ago, the one who set it up, a guy from DC, asked me about virtual minyan. And at that time I said it's not even something that entail the idea of people saying Kaddish virtually. And look what happened. The most frum rabbis now saying it's okay. But to zoom in the different idea of drashot or some words of encouragement. On the Shvi Shel Pesach, we are hearing or reading, each of us independently at home, the Kriyat Yam Suf. And if you look at Parashat Beshalach, part of manna from heaven, is the dialogue that occurred earlier before splitting the sea, which is Shamati et lunot bnei Israel, the same as God said to Moshe Rabbeinu earlier, Matitz akelai daber el bnei Israel v'yisau. The whole notion of finding positive versus negative in the current event and the approach we have toward the virus is something that it's on our shoulders. As someone said to me, there are medical doctors that are dealing with physical illnesses, and there are spiritual, mental doctors like us and our colleagues that are dealing with really depression, personal crisis, family crisis, and more that we have to deal sometimes on a daily basis. And as one of my colleagues in Israel said, that more than the coronavirus and all its consequences scary is the level of suicidal and level of fear of the unknown that so many people worldwide are facing. So some point to think, if you wish, you can share it, obviously. I'll start with the idea of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror. Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, which is the core idea of the Haggadah. Sometimes we used to ask why Maror is the last one on our list. And this year we can say that we understand it better because you never anticipated when Maror were occupied ourselves. And the whole idea of Aseret HaMakot, the 10 plagues, in a way you can expand independently, be a little creative, and show people the current event as part of the Aseret HaMakot. And I think for all of our colleagues as intelligent rabbis, you can have many, if not at least 10, between social distancing and the idea of, how far you can move out of your estate, and the idea that being together for Pesach versus ask Manishtana yourself as the Rabbonim rules, that this year, if you are in the Kvutzat Sikun, you should ask Manishtana yourselves. So obviously there's a positive part, as we said, there is a positive part of helping each other. There is a positive part that people came out even after they recognize a positive. You see the list worldwide. And there is a positive part that some people taking some aspect of Teshuvah, Avinu Malkeinu, and start thinking about, instead of being so selfish, for other people's needs. Overall, one of the sad part that occurred at the early stage of the coronavirus is the attitude that some of the Rabbanim already mentioned, the Israeli rabbinate, from disrecognizing it to saying, you just say Kapitel Tehillim, to say that no one of us will ever die of this, and no one of us will ever be affected if you do so and so and more. In addition to Chilul Hashem, for those who actively participate with the minyanim, and those who actively did all kind of violations. I assume you heard that yesterday in Lakewood, New Jersey, the police arrested a fellow that had 50 people for bat mitzvah and put him on the 5 charges, him and his wife, and more. So there is a always positive part and negative part of Pesach. If we can focus on the positive part and be the mentor and the healer, because when it's all said and done, so many people depend on us at this time, not just for entertaining them and make them feel good, but really to give them an eitzah and give them guidelines and show them the light at the end of the tunnels and take them out of the state of depression and loneliness. If in any form of helping, either by singing or by give them some positive thought, or even listening to what they have to say and try to give them the feeling of listening to them, that is a great mitzvah. There are a lot of lonely people. There are a lot of people who are very scared. There are many people who are not sleeping at night. And that brings us the whole idea of the beginning of the story of Pesach and the end of Pesach, that one of the PU team in Leil Seder dealing with the Amal Shomer, at Boker Vegad Laila, the idea of the Shomer appear in Pesach many times, in the Shomer Del Tot Yisrael of the Aseret HaMakot to the Shemira that we need all over from the beginning to the end, and to understand that, as we said, that Chad Gadya V'at HaKadosh Baruch Hu V'shachat Lemalach HaMavet, and that's basically the prayer that we all hold. May this will be soon nowadays that we call on the memory of coronavirus that happens once and should never happen again. So that's just some ideas that hopefully can help some of you, or maybe all of you.
Thank you, Rabbi Weisblum, for your thoughts. And Rabbi Melman, not to put you on the spot, I think you're the only person who hasn't spoken yet, which no one was under the obligation to, so certainly no pressure, but I have unmuted you, so if you have some thoughts to share.
Okay, I'll give a very short vort. So I did a gematria that Malach HaMavet and coronavirus share the same gematria. I did Malach HaMavet and coronavirus. I didn't do the math in front of me. I didn't show my work. I can show my work later. I can send it to you privately, and you can send it out. But so yeah, Malach Hamavis COVID equals coronavirus, but the cure is also has the same gematria, which is Moach Torah. Morach and Torah use. If we cleave to the spirit and the law of the Torah, and use our brains wisely as well, then we can combat this virus. It's a challenge and a test for us. So Hashem never gives the affliction without the cure at the same time. So you kind of caught me off guard here, but something I pull out of my pocket here. So I'll send you the pratim privately. So. All right. Good Pesach, kosher Pesach to everybody. Thank you.
Excellent. Rabbi Miller, did you have anything you wanted to share? You had
no, I put it in writing earlier.
Yes, indeed.
I appreciate you posting them.
Absolutely. Beautiful words and thoughts. Thank you to everyone for sharing Divrei Torah that I hope bring us sustenance, and hopefully I can put these out more publicly to allow that sustenance to carry to others at this time.